In this video we're going to do a quick size and weight comparison between the Lumia 620, 720, 625 and 920. Now this front profile is obviously dependent on the screen size, so 4.5 inches, 4.7 inches, the biggest one here, 4.3 inches and 3.8 inches, not surprisingly the smallest by quite some way. But you can see if you pick this up in the hand, you know the difference between something like the 620 here and then the 625. You know, if you've got a big hand, no problem using the 625 one-handed, but otherwise it sort of becomes an important factor in terms of the actual size. Then let's just look at the thickness of the device. It's no surprise here that the 620 11mm is kind of the thickest. It's kind of the smaller, thicker device. The 720 is actually the thinnest here. It's 9mm, but there's not a lot of difference to the 625. You can see here. This is 9mm, this is just over 9mm on the 625. If we're doing a comparison with the 920 quite noticeably a little bit thicker there. It's actually coming in at 10.7mm. So that's kind of looking at the size of the device. So the 625 actually comes off pretty well here because it's a thin device. But let's look at the weight, and to do that we'll need to bring in our trusty scales. We bring them in here. There you can see the weight set back to 0. So let's start with the 920, well known as being a heavy device. You can see there it's 186 grams. Then let's have a look at the 620. Not surprisingly quite light at 124 grams, smaller screen is what you'd expect. 720, 128 grams, so that's coming in just ahead of the 620. And then what about the 625? Well, it's actually a relatively heavy device, 163 grams, so I think that could be an interesting factor for people when talking about whether they want to get the 625 here. That's partly because of the way it's constructed. There's actually kind of an integral battery inside there and a big plastic moulding. It is noticeably heavier than some of the competing devices that are kind of in this area. They tend to be around the 130 gram mark and sometimes quite a bit less. But when you're getting a big screen, they do tend to be just a little bit up from kind of the smartphone standard, which I guess is around 120 grams. Nokia's devices always tend to be a little heavier than their competitors. That's partly because they have higher tolerances in terms of when you're dropping it and drop testing, things like that. These Lumia devices tend to stand up quite well. But in terms of things you take away for the Lumia 625, is it's a relatively heavy device, but it is a surprisingly thin device. That's really quite unexpected in a device at this price point. Sometimes you'll get thicker devices. Whenever you're cutting down the cost, compromises have to be made somewhere. In the case of the 625, I guess you could say it's in the weight of the device. It's partly about this LCD screen. They tend to be a bit heavier than AMOLED screens that are sometimes used on other devices. But there we go, quick run through comparison of the size and weight of various Lumia devices with of course the focus on the Lumia 625.